And joining us now on our Book Talk segment, great to welcome author of a book that kind of tells the story of a very interesting guy. He's an industrialist, entrepreneur, Elon Musk, and we're going to find all about it. Tesla Space 10 and the Quest for a Fantastic Future is the full title. We're joined today by Ashlee Vance from out in Silicon Valley, California on the telephone. And Ashlee, good to talk with you. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Hey, good to have a chance to talk with you, an opportunity to read through the book. I have to say I didn't know much about Elon Musk, but here's a guy that's making some noise for himself, isn't he?
Absolutely. He's got a lot on his plate. Some people might know at least one of his most famous products is PayPal, which he co-founded many years ago. And then, he subsequently took all the money he made from that and poured it into things like rockets and electric cars and solar panels.
Yeah, what led you to do a bio on him at this point?
Well, I live in Silicon Valley. I've covered it for many years for The Economist, The New York Times, and Business Week. And Elon was a guy who was floating around the valley for a long time. And I guess I'd been sort of a skeptic of him, really. He seemed to always be talking up these big ideas, but not delivering on a ton of them. And then in 2012, I just noticed he was finally kind of hitting on all cylinders. His space company, SpaceX, did a resupply mission with the International Space Station. Tesla came out with the Model S electric sedan, and his solar company, Solar City, had an initial public offering that went really well. And so I thought, this guy's really nailing it. And then I did a cover story on him and found that his life story was even more interesting, and so decided to do a book.
Yeah, he came from South Africa. Went through Canada, too. Am I right about that?
That's right, yeah. So, he grows up in South Africa. He's kind of, he has sort of like a rough childhood, and he's a bit of a loner. And so by the time he's 17, he'd been pining to get to Silicon Valley, but he couldn't quite make it. His mom was a Canadian citizen, so that's as close as he could get. And he ran away from home at 17 with $100 in his pocket and to Canada. And then, it's about 9 years later, he's worth about $200 million.
Yeah. You do a good job kind of describing his upbringing and his personality, which from many of the stories in the book can be difficult to work for. I don't know how he is like on a personal level, but to work for him sounds like it's pretty rough.
It's this sort of there's a lot of pros and cons. I guess he's a very intense guy. He's a very forceful character, and he seems to get a ton out of his employees. I mean, like a 6-day work week is pretty common at SpaceX and Tesla, or I should say, it's the bare minimum. And then I guess he's been known for kind of berating people in meetings and putting them down. But by the same token, he has these sort of otherworldly goals with his companies, and people love to work for him and put up with all that.
Yeah, and you talk about it in the book, he made his initial fortune through PayPal, which you kind of think that's been around for 20, 30 years now. It hasn't really been around that long, but people use it so much. I use it myself. How did he kind of develop that? He had some other people with him, right?
He did. It's funny. He had an internship at a bank in Canada, and he had decided that people in the financial industry were stupid. He thought they were kind of greedy and had a herd mentality. And so he'd been in Silicon Valley and done some internet startups, and so he thought, somebody needs to modernize finance. And he had this really sweeping ambition at first, which was to have an online bank that did everything: your 401k, your savings, your credit card. And, back then, this was like 1998, that was kind of a revolutionary idea. Yeah. It turned out that, like the PayPal, this kind of instant payment button on websites was actually like the big hit for him. And so there were a few co-founders, but he started the company. He was the biggest shareholder, and he did the best when they eventually sold to eBay.
It seems so simple now that everybody, or most everybody, uses it, but nobody thought of it till the mid-'90s, right, or late '90s.
Right. Yeah. There was sort of like right on this one. I talk about this in the book, but there's kind of this one street in Silicon Valley. It was actually like 2 blocks. In fact, it was the same office building. There were 3 or 4 of these startups all trying to do some sort of payment thing, and they actually were all competing each other to death, more or less, by outspending each other, and they kind of merge, and Elon ends up, being the leader of this one company. It's like a weird moment in time.
And his payoff on that, I guess he didn't get the whole $1.5 billion, but he got enough to start these other businesses, right?
Yeah, he got $220 million, which he then immediately poured into what I describe as a money destruction machine, which was, to start a rocket company and compete against countries. SpaceX, some people think it's like a space tourism thing, but it's not at all. I mean, it's competing against the national rocket launch businesses of Russia and Europe and China, and taking satellites to space for countries and for companies. And then almost right after he started SpaceX, he started pumping money into Tesla, which was very much like a niche product for a long time, and then ran right into the recession of 2008 when normal car companies were going under, and he sort of saw that through, and then he ends up putting a good chunk of change into Solar City as well.
Now, in your research on Elon Musk, is he a guy that comes up with the actual ideas, designs them, or is he just kind of a visionary and hires the right people to put these things together for him, or is he more of a marketer?
Right, yeah, well, he's a little bit of everything. I mean, there's no question he's got very bright people working for him, and that, these products would not exist without these other people. It's one of the things that I took great pains to do in the book, was to give attention to some of these people that have been sort of lost from history so far, because Elon enjoys keeping a lot of the attention for himself. But, to be totally fair, he knows everything that's going on inside of the companies. He comes up with, he's a physicist kind of by background, so he comes up with a lot of the ideas for the technology, and it's odd because he is kind of geeky and everything, and I don't mean this in like a demeaning way, but he does seem to have a real eye for design, and he certainly has like a flair for marketing. Tesla, doesn't spend $1 on advertising and is in the press much more often than Ford or GM, so he's got a few tricks up his sleeve.
Yeah, Tesla's the totally electric car.
Yeah,
he came up with that. He came up with that himself. I mean, that's his company all alone. He did that, huh?
So Tesla, there are a couple people that had the idea for an electric car all around the same time, and Elon was one of them, and they all sort of got together, and nobody else would fund the company, and so Elon put all the initial funding into Tesla, and then he wasn't the CEO originally, he was the chairman, and then a couple of years later he ends up taking over as CEO.
Yeah. I guess they're still kind of ironing out the bugs to get a battery that'll last long enough without a charge. Is that still kind of the issue with that car? Or
in some ways, I mean, no, so the Model S sedan is the one is their flagship car today, and it starts at about $70,000, so it's a luxury car, but, so it goes 300 miles on a single charge. They think they're going to get up to 500 miles in a single charge soon. It recharges really quick because of some of the technology they use, so you can get a couple hundred miles back in about 10 or 15 minutes, and so, I mean, it went from being a gimmick and sort of a compromise of a thing to one of the most desired cars in the world. They sell 50,000 of these per year right now, and when it came out in 2012, Motor Trend called it, perhaps the best car ever built. It's got the highest Consumer Report score ever, so, certainly not like a gimmick anymore.
Yeah, that's always been the issue, not only the length of the charge, but quickly recharging it, but the price, they have to get it down to where regular cars are priced now, I guess, to be competitive.
That's the whole goal for the company. They think by 2017 they're going to get it down to about $35,000, and they're going to come out with this, four-door, sort of more accessible car. They've got another one coming out this year, which is going to be called the Model X, and it's a SUV, but it'll also be expensive. So it's a couple years out till more people can afford this thing.
Do his companies, the Tesla and the SpaceX, are they making profits, or how are they doing?
Yeah, SpaceX is profitable, so it's kind of the more unlikely story of all his companies, and oddly kind of the most consistent performer. The figures will kind of stagger people. So SpaceX is basically the U.S.'s only means of getting to the International Space Station right now, and it's also kept the U.S. competitive in the worldwide launch market, which we completely lost out on over the last few years.
Wow.
And so they have a backlog of $8 billion over the next 5 years for orders. And then Tesla, it has had profitable quarters, but it is spending so much money right now on building a new battery factory. It's cost about $2 billion, and so it's spending so much on that it's not profitable, but it makes about $1 billion in revenue per quarter, and its market cap is half that of GM right now.
Wow. And we know well down here in Florida the space program, which is pretty much non-existent, so good to see an individual business doing that, but I just wondered if that was making any money, so it is doing okay.
It's making a profit, and then, so they just raised a little more money. Google and Fidelity put $1 billion into it, and it's a great story about America. So they make 90% of their rockets in a factory in Los Angeles. And, all the competitors in the U.S. rely on Russian engines, and SpaceX makes its engines here in the U.S. And, pretty much all the other competitors assemble a lot of parts from overseas as well, and SpaceX makes them all here. So it's a pretty good story.
And you talk in the book, too, about his personal life. I guess he's had a couple different marriages, right? Not an easy home life, I guess, for his family.
No, he's got quite the colorful personal life. Yeah, he's got 5 boys, twins and triplets, with his first wife, and then she was kind of his college sweetheart. Then they had a pretty tumultuous breakup, and then he fell in love with a British actress named Tallulah Riley, who he ended up marrying, divorcing, remarrying, and re-divorcing, and is now getting back together with her.
Oh, okay.
That is actually, that's hot off the press. I just found this out. So, and he lives kind of a very unconventional life. He has a house in Los Angeles, but he spends half his time in LA and half in Silicon Valley every week, and he doesn't even have a house in Silicon Valley. He just stays with friends, and so you can imagine it's sort of tough to live any sort of normal existence that way.
And he's still a relatively young guy, right? He's early 40s. You think he's been around, longer than that, but he's still a young guy, right?
Yeah, if you want to feel really bad about yourself, you just remember that he's only 43.
I know.
And he's sort of tackled 4 completely different industries and done all this stuff. So, but the one good thing is I've seen, especially from like a lot of the comments of people on Twitter and Amazon and all that stuff, is that they seem to be taking inspiration from this and see it as like kind of a calling to make good use of their time.
Is he a guy that I guess people have kind of called him the Thomas Edison of today? Does he see himself that way? And do you think he's going to have other things down the road that even be more innovative?
I say he's definitely not sure on ego. I think he would see himself in that ilk, although kind of with plenty of stuff left to do before he kind of would reach the ultimate pantheon of American inventors.
Right.
You've got to get that Tesla mainstream car on the market. He wants to make reusable rockets that would sort of drastically change the economics of space travel. He also wants to set up a colony on Mars. That's like his
ultimate that was a little strange, I thought. Yeah.
and so if he accomplishes maybe any one of those 3 things or all 3 of those, I think we would be talking about Elon for centuries to come.
Yeah, I think the electric car thing that would definitely revolutionize the economy, because you wouldn't need gas anymore, or at least not as much. So that would be one thing. But the colony on Mars, I'll stay away from that. I don't need to go to Mars.
Right. Yeah. The crazy thing with the Teslas today, so they have this network of charging stations across the United States, and you can drive a Tesla from LA to New York. You don't have to pay. It's free charging. So you can drive from LA to New York without paying anything for fuel.
I like that. Well, it's a fascinating subject. Elon Musk, again, Tesla, SpaceX, and the quest for a fantastic future is the name of the book. And we've been talking with Ashlee Vance. Ashlee, I know the book just came out, doing quite well. Do you have a website you want to direct people to?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been on the bestseller list since it came out. You can either, find it on Amazon or your local bookstore, and then my website is just ashleevance.com. It's Ashlee with 2 E's, and that's, and otherwise if you just Google me, my stories and everything are all out there.
Great. And we also put a place on our website, too, for the podcast, which we post. But actually, a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for taking the time. And next time you have a book come out, please let us know, or through Donna, and we'll love to have you back on again.
All right. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
If you'd like to order the book we're talking about, please go to DougMilesMedia.com and enter the author's name in the Amazon search box. Thank you for listening. Please come back soon for more conversations here at DougMilesMedia.com. This has been a presentation of Doug Miles Media, all rights reserved. You can listen to or download previous programs at iTunes, Stitcher.com, or Doug Miles.